You actually like build the level that you fight, like Hero Quest almost. If you remember
that's
Hero
cool.
Quest. Yeah, I played it after I got home last night, and I've really enjoyed it. It's a game
I
I think
think
you
we're
guys.
streaming now, by the way.
Okay, I think it's a game that you guys should. Yeah, you guys are. You're live. Should look into. I think you will appreciate the humor. It kind of has, I think, the same kind of humor that you want to inject in Delver's
What'd you
Drop.
say it was called again? Especially for the viewers.
Guild of Dungeoneering.
And it just released on Steam, I assume.
Yeah, I think Tuesday. I picked it up Tuesday, but I didn't get a chance to play it until last night.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of got like a narration thing going on in song, kind of like a bardic song type thing. The humor's really good. I want to I guess liken it to like, do you know what Dork is? It's like a card, like a game.
Sorry, did you say Zork?
Dork.
Dork?
Yeah.
I guess I do not know.
It's like a fantasy card game, but it's satirical. So it kind of has that, like like your first guy is called a chump. That's the class name.
Yeah.
And it just, it kind of just pokes fun at the whole dungeoneering kind of dungeon crawl type humor.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is cool. I like, satire like that. So I definitely recommend it. I played about an hour of it last night. Took a little while to get the hang of it. It doesn't have a tutorial really. But once you start learning, like, I guess the meta strat, it starts to get pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of like design, like I said, you just randomly design the dungeon. Like, it'll have a layout, it'll have certain rooms that are pre-loaded, and then you'll get, I think, like 5 cards, and some of the cards are enemies that you can put down. Some of the cards are like hallways. Some of the cards have like, this room has a fountain in it that has a randomized effect with like a potion.
And I like that kind of stuff a lot. The one board game I've played that's like that is oh, why do I always get the name confused? It's kind of vaguely Lovecraftian. It's like the House on Haunted Hill or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be the name, but it's so long I always think I'm getting it confused.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing like I said, it's like Hero Quest that I can think of. That's an old Citadel / Gamers Workshop game that I was a big fan of as a kid.
Oh, it's Betrayal at House on the Hill is the board game I'm thinking of.
Okay. Never heard of it. I'll have to look into that. And then, I guess it's both kind of interesting and also kind of part of the strategy. In that, when you kill a monster, you get like item cards, and the items are the things you can equip. And you only have them in that dungeon. When you go back to the guild hall, you lose them. So it's kind of got this concept where you want to keep fighting enemies so that you can get loot. And if you don't want anything from the loot pile, you can actually just, I guess, card the item, and it'll just turn it into gold, and then you can put the gold in a room with an enemy, and if you beat the enemy, you get the gold.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just keep that up indefinitely. From what I saw, it just keep getting money and money and money and money and money before you go and beat whatever the level condition is.
Mm-hmm.
I've only played up to the first 2 levels, and it took me about an hour, but I restarted a couple times. I just kept losing all my characters. So I wasn't really grasping the concept.
Yeah.
So we're working on Elements today. Now that it's 1, I'll stop talking about other people's games on your game stream. So you've changed the names again.
I changed like one name maybe and changed some of the positions. I was thinking about changing changing quell, the air, or like wind and storms and so on. But urge is very similar to surge, so that's probably a bad idea. But I was trying to think of, you know, thinking about the functionality of these. Like a muddle as an element would kind of weaken, confuse, innervate, slow down. So I was trying to think, okay, like if you used a sort of positive wind spell on something, it would like urge it, quicken it, sharpen it, hone it, that sort of thing. So because basically everything on the left side of the spectrum here is, you know, it can do damage, but it tends to be more like constructive or creative, where everything on the right side tends to be destructive or damaging.
Right.
So, and calling it quell, like the original idea was that it kind of like cleansed away things, but I'm trying to think of a more something that sounds more constructive than quell, because quell kind of sounds like a negative, like it's hampering things.
Yeah.
So, but quicken could be kind of cool, but I don't know.
I'm not sure that fits with the. I mean, arcane kind of doesn't fit with the rest, with like fury, spoil, blast.
Yeah.
They're very quick words. Arcane not so much, but arcane I think is unique in that way.
And it could just be quick.
Yeah.
But I was trying to come up with words
swift.
Yeah. I was trying to come up with words that could be nouns or verbs, but it doesn't always work. But those words tend to be more evocative. And I was thinking about, well, we had used the name Hush a long time ago for what has now become Grim. I wanted Grim to be a little more kind of dark and serious sounding, but I thought about using Hush instead of Shiver for ice.
I like that.
To you know, like thinking about how, well, like if you walk outside and it's, you know, everything's under a few inches of snow, how quiet it is, and how the coldness kind of like calms things and silences them. So the so that term quell almost kind of goes more under hush and ice, like the idea of quelling things, whereas wind would quicken things and enliven them.
Right, makes sense.
So I mean, hush doesn't totally make sense on this side of the spectrum, but I'm thinking of it as kind of a almost
more
like it could be like an
calm.
What's that?
A peaceful calm.
Yeah, like that's its kind of default nature, but again, like any of these can be used to cause damage. So the damaging side of cold would be like extreme or severe cold, or like using that to create an icicle that pierces something or whatever. But
right.
But of course, like fury could also be used to like cauterize a wound or something like that. So like. So it's kind of like the general nature of, well, I guess all of these could be out of control to some degree, but
and I like the interplay between
the lore, maybe.
Yeah, I like the interplay between the words fury and hush more than fury and shiver.
Yeah,
because fury is loud and boisterous and violent, whereas hush is like when you hush someone, you're not violently suppressing their ability to speak. You're just like, hey, calm it down. Shh, shh, shh. You know, that when I think of hush, that's what I think. It was the something very quick, something very subtle. So I like that, and I guess as you're moving it closer to Grim, I think that makes more sense as well.
Yeah, and I was thinking about, well, this is kind of messing up the like. Well, because originally we were going in a spectrum, really directly, so it goes like purple, pink, red, orange, and then kind of, when you flip to this side, it's like navy, blue, teal, green. But I wanted to achieve a couple things. One of them is I kind of wanted Surge to be near Splendor because of the idea of Ichor being the blood of the gods and like water in the world being kind of like diluted Ichor. So I wanted to move this up here, and it also, if you make that change, it makes sense to have water at the top and then go plants, because plants need water, and plants grow from the ground, so do ground next and then do hush. and then that makes sense next to Grim, because Grim is the element of gravity and the grave, and kind of like not so much silence, but more like the silence of the universe kind of thing.
Right.
Well, like, and it also, Oblivion is maybe a good word for it.
And it would, I don't know if you want to, I would say move Quick down to Howl, and move Howl to where Quick is.
Well, yeah, I thought about, yeah, that's probably what we should talk about next, is, well, let me see. So what I was thinking is like having Urge and Muddle, or, well, what we're calling Quick or Swift or whatever. So basically Wind and Muddle opposed to each other. So, you know, the idea of like if Muddle is kind of a dust storm that is clouding your vision, then Quick is, you know, kind of blowing that away and clearing your senses. So that was why I was thinking about having them opposed, but on the other hand, Howl doesn't oppose anything very well. Like there's almost nothing in the spectrum that it opposes well. I do kind of like having Howl near Hush and Fury, but I also get the idea of putting Quick there too.
Well, so, here's my thinking. Since you did the whole plants need water, water goes to plant goes to earth. Mm-hmm. You should put Howl, which is the animal aspect, near water, earth, and plants, because an animal needs all three of those things.
Yeah. Well, and it would make sense that Quick, so the the element of wind is between Mantle and Blast, because Quick would kind of erode things, erode earth, but also is related to an explosion, and it kind of makes sense next to Hush and Fury, because wind and ice kind of relate to each other, wind and fire can relate to each other, and so on. But then like Howl and Muddle, I mean, I guess you could kind of see like Howl is a strengthening kind of berserker element a little bit. Like it's maybe the one that has the fuzziest definition, or sort of has had. But all of these in the middle right here, the four, well, Sod isn't really an element. Sod is just kind of like completely neutral matter. Yeah. So it's only an element in so much as it's like, well, it's almost more of the lack of an element, because elements are energy, or like energy and magic in this universe are kind of the same thing. So I'll move Sod away for a second here. But then I'm trying to think, okay, like what opposes Arcane really well? Because right now we've got Quick and Arcane opposed to each other, but I'm not sure how much sense that makes. But I do like Arcane being here between Surge or between Water and Lightning, because it's kind of it's basically in the place where, like, these two, Echo and Arcane, are kind of the ones that aren't supposed to exist. They're kind of the like mad science experiment. Well, Arcane is sort of the god's mad science experiment, and Echo is the existence of ghosts. So neither of those were really, at the kind of creation of the universe, neither of those were supposed to be around, but they're like a byproduct of things going wrong. So
can we talk about what we talked about for Echo on the stream?
Refresh my memory.
The death of Prism. It's kind of meta lore, I guess you could say.
I guess I'm totally I'm not remembering at this point.
Okay, I'll do, I guess, an abridged. So when the universe first came into being before the Pylars, which you guys can go and see the information of Pylars on the website. I'm sure things are subject to change, but that's not I guess being too hidden. There was Void and Prism, which I think we even had on the elemental scheme. Prism being, endless creation, Void being, I guess, endless destruction in a way. So Prism was just making random chaotic universes, and Void was devouring them. And then Void ate, or somehow, I guess, metaphysically caught up with Prism and took a chunk out of it. And then what bled forth from Prism is the universe that we know in the Delver's Drop universe.
So, and going back to Echo, like, I guess that's the part I'm forgetting how...
Echo is well, since Prism died, since I guess a concept like that couldn't really die, Echo is what's left of Prism.
Mm-hmm.
It's the echo of its existence.
Yeah.
So it kind of made a metaphysical ghost realm. And that's why it wasn't intended for it to exist. It wasn't intended for Void to take a chunk out of it, or I guess kill Prism.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what everyone thinks about those ideas, because I've been kind of every once in a while working on pieces of the of that like ancient lore, and I definitely want to leave some pretty big mysteries, but yeah, like I haven't been sure if that's like hearing you retell it sounds pretty evocative, but then like whenever I think about it, I'm like, oh, those were, you know, my horrible ideas. Like, so I'm never sure if it's any good or not, I guess.
That was one of the things we came up with on one of our late night Skype chats.
Yeah. But you know, I was just thinking like the idea of kind of Prism and Void being almost these, not really beings, but these like forces in the universe.
Yeah. Well, the Pylars are like that, but they're, again, I don't know how much of them is going to change, but
yeah, I mean, I might change what some of them are or their names, because the names were pretty bad, but yeah, the general concept of the Pylars being these, you know, sort of like meta gods, like they're like kind of without personality and these big forces in the universe, but you know, maybe sometimes kind of communicate with humans to try to get things on track again or whatever. I still like that idea.
Yeah, I like the lore. I'm a big fan. Ever optimist Va, I guess.
So, well, so I guess then the question is, well, okay, so what should Quick oppose, and what should Arcane oppose? Because those seem like the biggest, or maybe they don't really have opposites. Like,
I was gonna say the middle, maybe they're not opposite. They're just states.
Yeah, they're just those are the two that are neutral. I do still want Echo and Grim to oppose each other, but I was messing with an idea where like Arcane and Howl would oppose each other, because Arcane is like the science experiment that would destroy living beings if it came in contact with them, or you know, mutate them, or you know, something like that. I mean, I still think Wind and Muddle opposing each other works pretty well, but yeah, Arcane and Howl, like, I mean, Howl and Muddle, like that does kind of make sense. Like they're both, you know, Howl would be sort of like making something go kind of berserk, or you know, like basically kind of run wild based on its instincts, whereas Muddle would be like diminishing its sensibility, like making it just kind of like dumb. So so I can kind of see Howl being opposed to that, because Howl would imbue power, even though it doesn't make something like smarter necessarily, but it also doesn't, like, it probably heightens its senses, whereas Muddle dulls its senses, I guess is maybe a good way to think about it.
Right. Well, and have we ever really discussed what Arcane does?
I feel like we have, or at least like, well, my, you know, Arcane is, I mean, it's kind of like free energy in the sense that, like, it's not really an element, you know, but it's, even though it fits in this chart, but it's more of a, well, kind of like anything that has to do with like chemical reactions, or you know, what we would today think of as kind of like chemistry, or physics, or like subatomic particles, any of that kind of stuff. So, you know, anything relating to Arcane is like, you know, has kind of these fuses and wires and tubes and Bunsen burners, and, you know, it's kind of like, basically, if you think typical mad scientist chamber, you know, full of pots of steaming liquid and coils of, you know, and tubes of liquid running around, like, that's what an arcane wizard, or whatever you want to call them, like an arcanist's lab would look like. So they're basically, you know, anyone who's practicing arcane magic, quote unquote, is basically trying to find ways to kind of mess with the fabric of reality, and essentially like cheat reality by creating these chemical or energy reactions. And so in general, arcane can be used to like power up other elements, or kind of like bend them to its will. So like I guess like one thought I had would be arcane would be the one element that can control Murk. Like a ray of splendor could sort of cut through Murk, or like punch through it, or push it or something like that. Whereas arcane, you could actually use that energy to like grab a chunk of Murk and sort of like throw it at somebody, using the arcane as like a magical manipulative energy source.
All right, makes sense with how we've kind of put that in the lore.
So the bad thing is then that we still kind of end up with like what opposes that. Like there's not. I mean, maybe Grim, because Grim is supposed to be the that sense of well, Grim is kind of like ultimate reality. It's like it's Grim is kind of the one. Well, also not really so much of an element, but is like the force of gravity and other limitations in the universe. Things that like kind of hold matter down and limit them, or hold energy back and limit them. And so that probably makes sense, and they are kind of opposed in this graph. Grim would also obviously oppose Echo, but then where does that leave Quick? Like I mean Quick could go at the very bottom. Like we could rearrange this a little bit. I guess Quick versus Echo doesn't make a lot of sense either, but I was also thinking Howl and Echo could kind of be a nice opposition, since Howl is the force of living sentient beings, and Echo is kind of the unliving, not quite sane beings. So it's life and unlife in a sense, because Howl would be I mean, it is kind of similar to like what Thrive is for plant life, but is like the force of life and survival.
Right.
So I mean, if we wanted to get really funky here, I could actually switch these, put Echo here. So it doesn't really look quite so much like it echoes between life and death anymore. But if arcane is kind of the ability to manipulate Murk, or to even bend Splendor to its will, then this kind of makes sense. And then maybe put, well, I guess I would end up with these opposed to each other again, but something like, well, something like this.
Just letting it catch up.
I sort of like the look of that, where it's got Echo and Howl in the middle, and then Arcane and Grim opposing each other on the other ends. Let me move this up a little, because that keeps getting in my frame. I think we've only got 5 viewers this week, and they're probably like you and I, and then like 2 other people in the office, so I'm not sure who the one other viewer is.
Doom, and there's a couple people.
Okay. So I mean, the one other thing we could kind of do is decide, like, well, does one of these have another attribute that that kind of hasn't been discussed, that we can add to richen the idea of that element, but also make more sense of why they oppose each other in certain ways, or or what have you. I mean, I guess Quick, if you think of Quick as the like the breath of life within something, or like sensibility, that could oppose Echo in that sense.
Right. And that would also kind of, I guess, oppose Muddle in a way, since Muddle is like the bleeding of different elements together.
I mean, this does kind of make sense. Quick, well, color-wise, Quick versus Echo is a little bit of a problem, but the colors aren't really. I mean, some of the colors still kind of make sense opposed to each other, but anyway.
Those are probably easier to change than the concepts.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Howl opposing Echo makes sense. Because I guess Howl's the one element that really kind of doesn't really fit with the other themes. Even still, I guess, in a way.
Howl opposing which? Sorry.
Echo.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, force of life and force of unlife.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I do, well, it's kind of a nice pairing where, like, Echo and Quick, because spirits will seem kind of like vapor or might sort of move on the wind or something like that. It kind of makes sense for those to be next to each other in a way.
I would actually put Grim in the center and just do away with Sod. Because since Grim is supposed to, I guess, be the finality, like the unchanging nature of the universe, having everything kind of radiate out from that central point. And it would still work within, I guess, the heart motif. Because it kind of, like, Grim is the foundation of the universe, whereas then you kind of go off to the sides and you see where the universe aligns itself on, I guess, the two elementals, or I guess on the three elemental spectrums, with Echo, Murk, and Splendor, and Arcane kind of in the middle of Splendor and Murk because it was the attempt of a god to, I guess, make like another pillar of creation. Where Splendor is, I guess, creation and Murk is entropy.
Well, I'm kind of feeling like... Let me move something back here really quick. Because I do still like Arcane being between electricity and water, and then having, if we have Wind, Muddle, and Howl all in the middle, like those are the ones that are the most, and Arcane, they're all kind of like these neutral, like they aren't really elemental, they're more like, well, not really forces of nature, but just, they're kind of like manipulating other beings or elements. And I guess Grim and Echo are also to some degree, but then having Howl between Mantle and Blast, I mean, that could kind of make sense.
Well, yeah, and in a way, this might sound a little strange, but having Surge, Quick, Thrive, and Mantle together kind of do the four basic elements. You're missing fire, but you have earth, wind, and water.
Yeah, like the 5 Chinese elements.
Yeah, and wood is the 5th. So you have 4, and I guess there's also metal, which would be Grim, is sometimes put on the classical elements as well. So yeah, I mean that corner has, I guess, the non-destructive elements from the Wujin is what the Chinese, I'm pretty sure that's how you say it. It's the foundational elements of creation for Chinese methodology, Taoist religion.
Yeah, this whole thing has been rough for me. I would like to just, every time I think I'm done with it, then I realize like some other problem or something, but
oh, I'm taking notes. I mean, I guess it makes sense that Grim is the terminus. I think you honestly can just keep Sod off.
Yeah, I wanted it to have a symbol, but yeah, it doesn't really need to be in the chart. Like if you used some kind of magic that did something Sod related, it would basically just remove other elemental properties from something.
Right, it's like anti-magic almost. Which is something we were talking about on the forums a while back having. So it's nice that the concept has remained. And I guess there's a joke, the sod off, old British saying.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of keeps in with the humor that you guys want. I mean, I guess Howl doesn't really terminate from ice and heat.
But if you think about, like, living beings kind of having the capacity for Hush and for Fury, that's I kind of feel like that works somehow.
Yeah.
And also like being able to live in cold and hot environments, and
right.
If you think about Hush and Fury being like two emotions, and Howl being like the fluctuation between those emotions.
Right, and I guess when you look at the heart chart, you kind of see this slow decline from energetic states of matter to more philosophical states of existence.
Mm-hmm.
Both Ren and Surge probably not solid elemental concepts, but both energetic, slowly going down, spoil, thrive.
And I think having, I think Grimm could still be, the element of kind of the exorcism of spiritual beings, kind of like putting them in their place or locking them back in the spirit realm. But I do like the idea of Howl. Like, if you think of animal spirits being the kind of the evidence of Howl, or Howl being able to kind of bring about like or call some sort of animalistic spirits, it makes sense that those would be opposed to these kind of undead ghosts. I like the idea of these kind of like somewhat positive. Well, I'm trying to think of a word that doesn't sound. I don't know, like you think, kind of these, the animal spirits of like Native Americans and things like that, those sort of things being opposed to like some kind of horrible undead, like monstrosity ghost type thing, and tearing it apart, like these two different spectral forces fighting each other.
Right, I see.
So, and that it kind of opens up a lot of doors in the lore, and this I also like the color opposition of this. Kind of this weird like pink color versus the weird unearthly teal of Echo.
Is that teal?
Yeah, I mean it's like a really bright teal. It's kind of like it's close to a cyan. Like, I don't know if we really have a name for this color. I mean, I guess sea foam would be the closest thing or something like that. So it's on the spectrum. It's between cyan and green, and just like very bright.
I thought Arcane was cyan or sea foam, or I guess close to sea foam.
Arcane's more like a that's more of a chartreuse color, like a yellow green.
Right.
So so Echo is more on the blue side of green, and Arcane is more on the yellow side of green.
Yeah. I guess seeing Echo on the color palette there makes it look more teal. The symbol, I don't know, it kind of looks almost like ice blue on my screen.
Yeah, that's probably true. That like it will kind of look like an icy blue, and I like that idea of I'm kind of imagining like a pitch black room in this like weird icy blue green kind of specter appearing. It just seems pretty cool to me. I
mean, the ghosts are a little bit darker blue, but
yeah, and so I'd be shifting that color a little bit, but yeah, kind of going off what we had before.
Here's a question that probably only Doom and I will care about the answer. Will we be getting teleporting ghosts back?
Probably. I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't kind of phase in and out. We just need to actually make them like playable,
They would definitely be really powerful in the builds that we have if they also teleported.
Yeah, I mean, I think instead of shooting, well, they were a little bit broken, they seemed a little bit dumb, and then they were like super buggy because they would, you know, like go through walls and stuff like that. Just kind of, but I do like, I mean, they were effectively kind of spooky and interesting. Like I think that conceptually they were pretty successful. They just didn't play very well, and so yeah, I would like for them to come back.
Yeah, they were kind of like Apache helicopters in the very first, like you'd see them shoot from off screen, you're like crap, and you'd be able to dodge like one blast, and then I think the most that were ever in a room at once in the very first alpha, or I guess the pre-alpha build, was 4. They'd all 4 teleport like right up next to you, and you're just like, well, this is my death. I'm done with this run, right? And then they just blast you away.
Well, and I was thinking that maybe it would be cool if they, instead of just shooting at you all the time, if they actually kind of charged at you, like tried to like, just like zipped towards you, flew towards you or whatever, and tried to like pass through you to cause damage too. And so, I think they're sort of like spectral orbs they shoot. I don't think those should go that fast. Just if you think about conceptually the way the ghosts themselves move and everything, and the fact that they just shoot these fast fireballs, it seems kind of weird. Like I'd rather them shoot like very slow moving homing fireballs that seek the player. And that's how I want a lot of the kind of spirit-based projectiles for the sorcerer to end up acting, where it's like they're low damage, but the good things are they sort of lock onto or home toward an enemy. So if you're a little off target, they'll actually veer toward the enemy, but just do a little less damage than most other weapons.
Right. Doom also volunteers to do the ghost AI.
Okay, awesome.
Which is probably bad for everybody involved. Because he'll make
the game will become impossible.
Yeah.
Except for Doom himself.
And me, probably, only because I'll play the game to the point where I can do it. I mean, one of my favorite things from all the builds has been able to get a deeper understanding of game balance. Like now I go and I play their games and I'm like, okay, so here's how I've seen a game in an alpha state.
Yeah.
So it makes me think, well, how did they get to this point? What was the deciding factors? How did they come to the conclusion that this was balanced? Is it balanced? Were they correct? Were they incorrect? And how can I take this lesson and move it on to other games? Like how can I improve, you know, with input? How can I give input to games that are not necessarily in a finished state?
Yeah, and it's a really good thing to kind of learn or practice, and it's something that, like, when I play a game, I get a little absorbed, and I just kind of stop thinking about how it was put together, because I just want to start experiencing the story or, you know, get through the next challenge, and I get a little like too laser focused. But it's really good to, at least as a game designer, to or if you're interested in that kind of thing, to like step back and think like, okay, yeah, what decisions were made, like you were saying.
And Doom actually makes a good point, and it's something that he and I have talked about before. It's weird. He said that he always found it weird that the ghosts attack right off the bat. I mean, he says they're crying after all. Wouldn't it make sense that they only attack you if you disturb them? And I think, like I said, he and I have talked about that before, and I think it's a cool idea and I know it's possible with the AI now, where you could have an enemy that wouldn't have an attack state.
Yeah.
And then, say, kind of Indiana Jones it, grab the idol off the pillar and then have the enemies go into a berserk, you know, an enraged state and attack you, or there's a gobble in the room, and this isn't an enemy for those listening, as far as I know, but just a hypothetical, like, gobble mother. Since I know, I guess they don't really have mothers; they're you know, fungus more or less. But you know what I mean, like a hive mother or a brood mother. And the gobblings would be aggro, but the Broodmother wouldn't. So you could make a puzzle where instead of fighting the enemy, the goal would be to get out of the room without actually attacking the goblins.
Mm-hmm.
And I also know, since we've talked about, I guess, room conditions before, I know that it would be possible to kind of have that puzzle actually be created.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it would be really neat to have a puzzle like that where it's almost I don't know if the word modular works here, but there's more than one way to solve the room. You can either do the puzzle as it's written, or you can take it, I guess if all you have is a hammer approach, maybe a good term for that. It's like, I'm just gonna, brute force this room. I'm gonna attack all the goblins. I am going to enrage the Broodmother, and then kind of, I guess, turn a puzzle room into a mini boss room.
Yeah, and I guess we need to make a decision about, like, when you're in a room and the condition is that you have to kill all the enemies, or actually, I think what's better for us than kill all the enemies, because there are a lot of times an enemy will be like hiding in a corner, or you can't see them behind a wall or something like that, unless you have like I think if we had a kill all the enemies room, all the enemies would be the same type. It would be like 10 gobles. They're easy to spot, they're easy to find, and you've got a counter that shows how many you've got left. If there are other enemies in the room, then they don't really matter. So you could have some bats, but they aren't part of the win condition. If whether you kill them or not, it doesn't matter. But if you kill all 10 gobles, then it unlocks the room. But I think something that has, like you're talking about, the kind of Broodmother, or like a mini boss kind of alpha of the pack of enemies, then probably the idea of that room would be survive for a certain amount of time. So it's actually say you've got like 30 seconds that you have to stay in this room and you're locked in until that timer is up. That kind of makes sense that, like, well, you could try to kill all the enemies. Like, that's something you could do in that room. Or you could, like, kind of play it like a stealth game and avoid confrontation. Like, don't kill anything, because then it's going to aggro the alpha.
Right, that was exactly the idea. And Doom actually asked, isn't there plans for, like, patrolling pseudo-stealth enemies? Which I think that's what the spiders are supposed to be.
Yeah, we haven't kind of gotten into testing all of that stuff yet, but that all the changes in the AI system were designed to make enemies kind of seem like smarter. So before they were just like dumbly aggressive. They would just like find you no matter where you were and attack you, and so it made the game interesting kind of because it was so hard. But I'd rather the game be hard because the enemies are smarter, and even if that means they're a little less aggressive, it's kind of more fun to beat an enemy that feels like it has actual intelligence rather than just brute force. And,
right.
So yeah, having enemies that go on patrols, or like if they, there isn't literally like a system of hearing in the game, but we have a proximity bubble for enemies as part of their AI. So they may have like a 500 pixel proximity bubble that if something trips it and is on their list of things they're trying to pay attention to, like threats to them or prey that they want to chase down and attack, then if one of those things enters that proximity, then they'll usually like turn and face it, or they might run from a threat. But I think of that general proximity as being their hearing distance. So
right.
Some enemies, like if we had an enemy that, I don't know how you would communicate this to the player, but if you had an enemy that was supposed to be deaf, then we would probably just give it a no proximity, like no sense of hearing or proximity sensation. But maybe they have a sense of sight, which would be directed, like they would have a cone of vision. So if you walk in front of them, they're going to detect you, but you can sneak around behind them as much as you want.
Well, and I think games like Mark of the Ninja are really good with that, and I mean, Dishonored isn't quite so good at being able to see it without the shadow sight, but the shadow sight kind of gives you an idea of not just their hearing range and their sight range. So I think there is a way to show the player that enemies. I don't know how seamless it would be, since Delver's Drop really isn't a pure pure stealth game. So I don't know how viable it would be just to slap on like vision cones on every enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe, and I guess this would add to the art assets, but have like an indication somehow, even if it's just like a symbol over the enemy's head of
That they have sensed you.
Yeah, that they've sensed you. They're close to sensing you,
Mm-hmm.
or they haven't sensed you, which would, I guess, be no symbol.
Yeah. And yeah, we talked about doing something like that, like having an awareness animation state, or a particle effect or something over their head. 'Cause you're gonna have to know somehow, like, other than the fact that they're now like charging at you, you'll have to know that they detected you.
Yeah. Well, there needs to be a way to know that they're close to detecting you, and I guess once they detect you, they've detected you because they're coming at you. So there needs to be some kind of sorry, I was reading what Doom said, and I guess he's saying what I'm saying. There's no way to ever gauge hearing or seeing in games without some kind of crutch or aid. So yeah, some kind of particle effect over their head, like, okay, they're close to sensing you. So it's not a visible sphere of knowledge, but as you play and as you learn the game, you get more and more able. You just learn,
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this all goes back to the idea of static gameplay versus dynamic gameplay, which I think is at the core of what we're talking about with the AI states and all of that. Whereas the game right now is, I would say, static, and I would define Isaac as static gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it can't have emergent gameplay. There are a set number of interactions in Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with your guys' AI, it's much more dynamic, where every room is going to have a different way it plays out.
Yeah, I mean that's the goal anyway. Let's hope.
Yeah, I mean, you guys can't have a completely unlimited number of interactions. That's impossible to do in anything. There's always going to be a set parameter. The goal, I guess, is just to make the parameter as high as possible, that it appears to be limitless.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Doom is saying, if you want a more combat-focused room, you'd have to braid the consistency. So
yeah, well, but if you make a room small enough where there's kind of like no place to hide, so that the enemies basically sense you right away, then it isn't that much of an issue. But yeah, I mean, this is going to require a lot of testing once we really kind of get full force into AI design. I mean, because we've done like AI system design, but we haven't really gone through and done a lot of like individual enemy AI design yet.
Well,
so we haven't kind of put the whole system through its paces or anything.
Right. Well, here's a question then. Is it possible? Let's say, and I'm just going to keep using the gobble because it's the most recognizable enemy. So let's say you have a room where you want the player to kill 10 gobbles, but you want the room to be big. Could you put a trigger in the room that changes the AI state of the gobbles?
It's probably something we should consider. I think the way to do it would be through. Well, there's going to be like an effect system where you can make things enraged, which changes their AI and like let's say if you walk in a room and suddenly like a spell gets auto cast in that room so that it makes everything in the room berserk. And so being berserk means that the Gobles all now are way more aggressive and have much bigger sensory bubbles because they're on the alert, like trying to find anything to kill. Like that's probably how I would achieve it. So it also doesn't break the consistency of the world where like, oh, Gobles are usually more peaceful and then in this room they're just crazy. You know, show the player why they're crazy by making this kind of enraged berserker state.
Yeah, I mean that's basically what I'm talking about as a trigger. Like, so you go from a room with 10 gobbles where the goal is avoid, and then you go into another room where there's 20 gobbles, and you'd think, oh well, I have to avoid, but then you see, I guess, the lock door condition. Which I think I think that's one of the best things that you guys have done. I guess to improve the game, is the door holograms. I don't really have a term for them yet.
Yeah, well, we call them threshold icons. It's sort of like an icon in front of. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's an icon that goes like right in front of the doorway that shows, hey, the door is locked due to this condition. Like it's locked until you kill the enemy, so it has a skull or something, or it's locked because you need a key, so it's got a key icon.
Right.
Especially because like with our perspective, you can't really see what's going on inside the door frame very well. So even if there's like a metal gate with a keyhole, it's really hard to see unless you get in just the right perspective. So that was our solution.
It looks great. It is one of my favorite things that you guys have added to the game so far. But yeah, so them knowing, oh hey, it doesn't have the clock icon, it has the slay icon. And then once you get far enough into the room, whatever that trigger is can fire. Make it really visible, make it really easy to understand.
Yeah.
You know, and use it every time, you know. I mean, I guess variation is good, but have the theme not change. So every time you're in a room with enemies that you know have a certain AI state and are going to change, you see that effect and you know instantly. You may not know what the AI change is, but you know the AI state has changed.
Or there could even be, I'm kind of thinking of in the new Gauntlet game, how there are those, I don't know how many people have played it, but there are these like pillars that kind of summon a bunch of enemies, and you actually have to destroy the pillar or it will keep summoning them. So I'm thinking something kind of like that pillar, even like some kind of beacon in the middle of the room that enrages all the enemies, and if you destroy it, then they might stop being enraged, but you still have to kill all of them. So you know, something like that, that's kind of a clear point of like, hey, this is the thing that generally causes these status effects or these AI changes.
Could you link that to an enemy?
Yeah, there probably could be enemies that cast that spell or whatever as well.
Well, I guess this goes back to the Broodmother idea or the mini boss idea, which I should probably just use that as a universal idea, where. And I guess this is in other video games where, like, you know, the caster buffs enemies. And if you kill the caster, the enemy goes back to normal, but without killing the caster. It's very popular in, like, games like Diablo and Torchlight, and since there is some, you know, overlap with those games in Delver's Drop. Yeah, I was wondering if that was possible.
Yeah, it's, I mean, right now, I guess the one main kind of holdup is just that the effect system still hasn't had a lot of work done to it, so that's, I would like to say it's going to be possible, but until we really kind of dig into the effect system and get some actual effects working, I don't want to promise too much about that. So that's been like the one area of the game that has been in some ways the most lacking, maybe, or the most just kind of non-present. It's like we have all these capabilities, but to just like cast a spell that you know, buffs the player or whatever is still getting worked on. So.
Well, I guess just another random Voss spinning off into potential stuff that might not be in the game, but it would be cool to have an enemy that is usually naturally neutral to the player, or even beneficial to the player, and then have enemies in the room that change the AI state to making them highly aggressive.
Like the kind of horses of the world, which have been
the Jebra.
sort of, which I need to change that name, but yes, horse llamas. Yeah, like those things would normally be peaceful unless you attack them. But yeah, like if we get everything to work the way I want it to, it would be possible for there to be some enemy that casts a spell or a buff or debuff or whatever you want to call it that makes them go crazy and just attack everything that gets in their sensory bubble.
Right, and what I was going to spin off on that was, would it be possible, let's say, the doors only unlock if you have a certain number of them still alive? I know people usually hate like escort quests and quests like that, but I was just wondering if it was possible.
That starts getting a little more tricky because I think the way that the room stuff gets defined, like I'm afraid that system might be a little less flexible. Like I don't know that we're going to be able to, unless we kind of redesign it. I don't know that we're going to be able to change the unlock parameters of a room once you've entered it. So it's like, if you enter it and like let's just say the doors are unlocked, but then like this enemy casts a debuff and now you gotta kill or not kill a certain number. Like I'm not sure. I mean that could be kind of cool if like even if an enemy could go around just like casting spells on doors and locking them to make it so it's harder for you to get out, or casting. But yeah, I guess like in general, as far as like kind of the escort idea of like, I guess the way I would do it is probably like you've got 30 seconds or so to keep a certain thing alive, and if it dies, but then like we don't want players to get stuck in a room, so it'd probably have to be like you could exit out the way you came in, but it's more like a kind of like a puzzle condition, like you can get through this special door to get treasure if this thing stays alive for long enough, something like that. But yeah, right now we don't really have plans for that. I think it's a cool idea. It's just not really on the priority list right now, I guess. Right.
And Doom mentions the imps from Diablo, which will run away from you, but if the Taskmaster is there, he will make them not run away and actually stay and fight you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think once you guys roll out the AI system, people are going to be really impressed. Again, ever optimist flaw, but
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think compared to a lot of other games of this type, I mean, it's like I guess really probably Dark Souls is the only other example of a game that kind of is trying to put that much care into the way enemies behave and all of that. Like, you've got a Diablo or something that has these different aggro states and everything, but Diablo isn't an action game, and so there are certain, or at least not in the sense that ours is, they don't have the same kind of like hitbox stuff. Yes, it has hitboxes and all of that, but it's like not there's not nearly the degree of kind of like hitbox physics that we're dealing with, where ours is situated in this weird place like between a fighting game and a Diablo-esque action RPG, to where it actually, like, I guess the way our game runs is actually way more like a fighting game than like a Diablo on the back end. So anyway, I guess I'm probably getting like way far afield, but it's I don't know of many other games that have tried to put that much care into that many different things, and that's probably why the game is running so behind.
I think you guys are fine, but I'm obviously at this point too biased to weigh in any fair capacity. So yeah.
I think I'm liking this arrangement. Like I'm pretty happy with where all this stuff has ended up. Just to kind of get back to the original subject. Like I actually didn't. Well, I was thinking about changing some of the colors, but I ended up not, because I decided I liked what was on the sheet already better. The only thing I changed was to make stone a little more dull, really, which I think is good. Just making it more kind of like this blue-gray works pretty well.
Yeah, I like the changes. It's given. I will be writing furiously tonight.
And I wonder if Grim needs some other, like we were making these kind of spectral chains, but I wonder if it also needs something like a, I don't know, like spikes or nails, or, you know, kind of like a vampire stake kind of thing, but I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe that's overkill.
I'm sorry, what's overkill?
Whether the particle effects for a Grim spell need a kind of, I was wondering if they should have something like a spike or a stake in addition to the spectral chains that they currently have.
Oh, I think it should.
I think it could make it look a little more violent, or also if you think of the idea of like pinning something to the ground or pinning it down through gravity.
Yeah.
Having these, I probably need to. Well, when I make the actual spells, I'll redo these a bit, but I'd like for them to kind of look more spectral. Like right now, they look pretty physical, so I probably need to make them look like inverted, like photonegative, the way the values are. So like reverse light and shadow or something.
Do you have any sound effects for them yet?
No, I need to get back to those, because yeah, some of these changes have definitely messed up the or just messed with the sound effects that we had. I mean, I think things like Fury and Ice and stuff like that can remain as they were, but I'm trying to remember now, like well, I guess we had some blast effects, but blast wasn't really an element, so we're gonna have to expound upon that a bit. And since now quick or air and wind has become more peaceful, I guess. Like before it was I think it was just called force, and
Yes.
It was a little more violent sounding. And then we, howl, we'll have to come up with something for that, which, ought to be pretty easy to make kind of howling animal noises, I suppose. Just like layer wolves and roosters and stuff over the top of each other, I guess. And then echo wasn't an element, so we'll have to add that one. But I guess, yeah, so that list isn't terrible. But I know there was a lot of time that kind of went into when Nathan Liar, the guy who does our audio, was working on these, just making all the kind of varieties of effects.
He's a really cool guy.
Yeah, did you, you've never met him, right?
I've not met him in person, but he and I have talked on, he follows me on Twitter.
Oh, okay.
We've talked on Twitter before.
Yeah.
About quite a few things, actually.
Cool. Yeah, he's a really nice guy.
Yeah, he is. He sent me some links to other work that he did one time. He's like, hey, what do you think of these?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, holy crap, these are really good. He's like, yeah, I can't talk about the game or anything like that because it's under NDA, but yeah, I'm glad that you got to give them a listen because they'll probably never come out. I was like, oh, that's unfortunate. They're really good.
Yeah, I think I know what game that is, because yeah, that was some of the my favorite work that he did was for a game that ended up never actually being released, and never will be at this point. Like it was for, I guess, I mean, it probably doesn't mean anything to say it was for the DS downloadable service. I mean, I guess in theory someone could put it out on 3DS, but no one's going to at this point. It's like in the the publisher we were working with is probably in their the end of Indiana and Jones 1, where it's just like the boxes of government secrets. Like that's basically what our game is at this point to the company that commissioned us to work on it.
Right.
And I did have it on like a a RAM card or a ROM card, I should say, for a long time. But I don't know if it works anymore. The version I have.
Yeah. How did you meet Nathan? Just through doing all that?
We worked at the same company.
Oh, okay.
At Black Lantern. Yeah, the place I used to work and first started making games and everything.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think either of you had ever said how you guys knew each other
Yeah, and well, he ended up there. He worked for Sony, I think, for a while as like a tester and maybe doing some audio. I can't remember if he did audio there or not. But his brother came to Springfield somehow or other. I don't really know that story, but his brother worked as an artist at Black Lantern, and so I worked with his brother, and then he ended up coming there too.
Does he live in Springfield? I thought he lived in California.
Yeah, he moved back to California. They're both from California, and his brother had lived in Texas and then moved up here. And I think he and his brother at this point have both moved back to California. But.
Yeah. So last I talked with him, he was in Cali.
Yeah.
So it's closer to me. Yeah, he and I talked about how he did some of the audio effects for Delver's Drop.
Yeah, like stabbing cabbages for like sounds and stuff like that.
And the bat squeak is actually just a shoe on like tile flooring and stuff like that. I thought that was all the Foley work that he did is pretty cool. So
well, I'm pretty happy with where all the element stuff ended up. So I guess next step would just be doing some of the particle effects, although I'm actually kind of hoping now that Spine for a while has supported mesh deformation, I'm hoping that we could do some more nuanced and easy to animate effects for these through mesh deformation rather than doing it all hand drawn, because that takes extra texture space, and maybe I'm just being lazy, but I love doing frame by frame animation, but it is just like a lot of work when we could, especially for some of these things that happen so quickly and there are lots of particles flying around at once. It would be way easier to just like take one shape and like deform it and wiggle it and that sort of thing.
I like all the effects. They're all very evocative, which I think is what you'd want to go for.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty nice variety of like shapes and styles and
yeah, there's no one is really the same as the others. I guess Merc is a little less gloopy than I would think it would be.
Yeah, I've ended up making it a little more, trying to make it a little more interdimensional looking. Like it's sort of, it doesn't quite live happily in the three-dimensional plane. So I guess like. It's well, for anyone who's played Fez, I think of it kind of like the big like black hole like glitch areas in Fez.
Yeah.
A little bit, except ours is obviously more like goopy, liquidy. Which speaking of which, like I should probably add some additional color to that. I don't know what is going on downstairs, but someone is like.
I can hear it.
Like
someone's hammering.
Building a car or something. Yeah. And I can actually feel it vibrating under my feet, so I have no idea. They hammer down there sometimes. Like, there's a business, they do flood drying, and they've got a bunch of equipment and stuff. And they've hammered before, but today is just worse than usual.
Well, isn't the Midwest, like, underwater right now?
Well, it's all kind of receded. Yeah, my crawl space is finally dry, praise the Lord. But, or as they would say in Dark Souls, praise the sun.
Praise the sun.
Yeah, so I guess we survived that. It hasn't rained. Well, it rained one day this week, but not much. And I think most of the water had like run off before then. So, yeah.
They are rebuilding the entrance to the building, apparently, Nathan says.
Did it fall apart?
I don't know.
Nathan, what's going on downstairs?
When we went down there, they were sanding the whole front of the door, and it looked like they were going to refinish it and put on the new magnetic locking device.
Oh, the door had been sticking a bunch.
Yeah.
So I guess that would make sense that Nathan said they're sanding it and putting on a new magnetic lock and stuff, which, yeah, I think because of all the moisture. It's every summer this has happened, but the doors here kind of swell and stick a bunch. But I think it's been to the point where like if someone I always try to pull it shut behind me, but if you don't do that, it will stick a little bit. So people might just wander in because the door isn't properly locking. So it doesn't surprise me that they're doing some work on it. It probably needed to happen a while ago.
it's always good to have house repairs, I guess. Can't leave anymore. Can't leave without a proper entrance. Doom says you're stuck there forever.
What's that? Okay, bring it over here and we'll talk about it on the stream. Aaron has a question about wall generation. He's working on the next kind of next level of random room and wall generation. So we'll there's Aaron. I can't adjust my camera very well, but okay. So what's maybe you guys will be able to hear Aaron too.
I'm not sure how this can come across on the screen because it's really important to actually look at this in paper, but say you have wall here, T here, F, F. Because the T's pull out on the buffer as well, because this the W doesn't have a buffer on all sides, the order in which the T's pull makes a difference. So do you want a specific order for this kind of thing, or do you want to do something like this, where it makes sure to only, like, T's and stuff will only pull off of walls, not what other T's or A's or whatever have pulled off?
Yeah, if that's simpler for you, I think this works pretty well because then you've got a
consistent.
Yeah, you've got that 2x2. So otherwise, we'd end up with there would be
one,
like pillar here, and there could be a pillar there, and a pillar. Like it's just lots of pillar opportunities. So this would have those pillars, and yeah, it's a little more uniform. I mean, this looks kind of cool, but I think this will work better and probably simpler for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
I figured that was going to be the case, but I wanted to make sure.
Okay.
Hi, Aaron. Bye, Aaron.
Vasey said hi and bye to you. I didn't hear him for a second because my headphone was off. But yeah, so basically, probably none of that made any sense.
Nope.
Because so the W's and T's and all that are basically it's codes for any given cell, which or well, we're calling them chunks. A chunk is like a 3x3 set of grid squares in the world. So any 3x3 chunk of the floor is a chunk in our terminology, and those have a one tile buffer around them, which doesn't really matter. It'll complicate things unless you see it. But so basically, what he's doing is he's generating hallways and rooms out of chunks. So like he has like sets of 3x3s on a kind of a meta grid that all generate to create a room, but then he codes them, so some of them are F's, which just mean they're free, they're just generic, and then some are T's, and if it's a T it means it's a thin space, so it basically pulls the walls in. So I'll try to sketch, where did oh, there's my pen. So if this is let's say if this is a room, and these are the chunks inside of it. So I drew this really poorly, but we'll survive probably.
Just let things catch up. Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah.
So imagine that the kind of gray squares here are 3x3s, and in between this space here is one tile. So this is how rooms are built, is these 3x3s that all have a one tile buffer in between and around all of them.
Right.
So I know my drawing is pretty horrible, but that's supposed to be like that should be more like that, because there's only one tile here. Okay, so what he's doing is coding these. So like let's say this is coded as this is an F, and this is a if I start losing track because he's doing a bunch of complicated stuff, but let's say this is an A, and this is an F, and these two are T's. And then you can also have wall, like there are also cells inside the wall here that define, like, because walls are typically 3 tiles thick as well. So basically a whole dungeon is generated on this chunk system. So let's say all of these are walls, walls, walls. And we'll call this an O. Like walls can dynamically change to O's. So each of these would be a chunk. And these aren't anything that will be editable by modders. This is just, well, the frequency of the generation of A's, T's, O's, W's, all that will be editable by modders, but but the system itself won't be. It's just kind of hard-coded in because it's super complicated. So anyway, what would end up happening is if these generate in this way, first, you know, he kind of like, basically he just plots out these characters on a grid, and then the game starts generating the walls to define a room. So if I dim this, what the walls would actually look like in this room would be the T's. These T's pull the default wall space into here. Let me make a new layer so we can see what's going on. Oh, come on. So default wall gets pulled into there. For some reason, can't. Oh my gosh! Come on. New layer. There. Okay. So this would get pulled in. I think this T would probably pull into here. I start getting a little foggy on all the rules, but T's pull in by 2 tiles, so it would pull in like so. I think it would do something kind of like this, but I might be wrong. And A's only pull in by 1 tile, so they're like a softer version of the T. And F's are just the default. O's push out, so it would actually pull the wall 1 tile out this way, and like that. So you end up with a much funkier shape of a room than if the room were just the default shape, like so. But of course, like if all this just generated as F's and W's, which are the default characters, F for free space, W for wall space, then it would generate as that. So you can see, like, you know, for 2 different dungeons, we could, by generating the same, essentially the same room, like general room shape, we could then kind of like randomize the wall spacing to create a more organic or like cave-like structure. So some of that's probably a little bit inaccurate, but it's a pretty cool system he's working on. What's that, Aaron? Huh? Like what I explained incorrectly? Yes. Okay. Sure. We'll give Aaron the headphones here for a second. Do you want the pen?
I don't know how to actually mess with the pen because I don't.
You just draw.
But anyway, you have
How's it going,
music.
Aaron?
Hey, there's music playing in one ear and it's throwing me off.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but I have to set my audio up that way.
Yeah.
Aaron
It's
is
actually-
the red control.
Yeah. So the thing that this actually had to do with a question that I just asked him about. So this is why this is important. Like for the T's, if I actually just draw here, yeah. So the question I asked him about, like, say you start working on this T first, and it pulls out this wall. Well, for then when you get to this T, when it pulls in all the walls, does it pull in this wall as well? Because that would change the shape of this, rather than if you worked on this T before working on this one. So the solution we decided on was that T's and A's and whatnot only pull from walls that aren't, that are just from the, they don't pull in from the parts that are pulled in by other letters. So this T would, you know, also pull in from the bottom, pull in from this side, pull in from the top, and create this kind of shape. I's, which is in here, I's pull in from all sides. A's randomly pull in from one side. So it could, yeah. So it could pull in from this side, or it could pull in from the top. O's he got right. There's also B's, which are between an I and a T. B's pull in all sides by 1, but will randomly pull in one side by 2. So between those you can get all sorts of different shapes, like, you know, whereas with just the S and W's you would only create this kind of straight hall. If you have like O's over here and make these, you know, I's or A's or other things, you can have this hall that gets, you know, kind of windy. And now you know why he's the artist and not me.
And you're the programmer, not me.
Yeah. But anyway, that's just my explanation of the stuff I've been working on. There's a lot of just interesting little sub-problems in this, like, because of this buffer system, we had to come to decisions on, do A's pull in on just the chunk, or do they also pull in on the buffer as well? And for O's, we decided that, you know, they only pull in on the chunk unless they're next to each other, then they pull in on the whole thing. And for this kind of wall edge right here, it would also make sense for it to go flush to the wall instead of this weird one world unit kind of sticking out thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
So I have a question for you, Aaron.
oh, you have a question for me. What's up?
Sure, of course. If a room would be like a 3x3 cluster, so I guess it's a 9 cell. Would there be a grill, or does the pull rules apply to things that aren't just walls? Does that make sense?
No, could you explain that again?
This is from Doom. I'll see if he'll rewrite it, because I might have just worded it weirdly. If a room would be like a 3x3 cluster, so a 9x9 cell.
So like 3 chunks.
Yeah, a
3x3
yeah,
chunk.
3x3 chunk. Is that on a? Wouldn't there be a grid, or do the pull rules also apply to things that aren't walls?
The way I'm setting it up is that, like, empty spaces that aren't next to walls can't become A's or I's or T's. The algorithm just will ignore those because it only pulls on walls. It can't. You can't pull in another free space.
So what you're saying is that whatever the letters are only apply to the walls. Anything in the room that isn't a wall doesn't get affected.
Yeah, like, this thing only just messes with the borders between free space and walls. So, like, for this example here, like, way out in the distance, these would all just be just W's out there. And if, say, this room was really, really big, it would be filled with F's in the middle. But then along the edges, you could have I's or T's or A's or B's.
The grid, by the way, that he's referencing is the one cell space between clusters.
Oh, sorry, Ryan was talking to me at the same time you were. Can you repeat that?
The grid that he's referencing, Doom is referencing, because these are all sealed from Doom, is the one cell spaces between clusters.
Yeah. We refer to that one cell space just generally as the buffer space kind of thing. The agreement we decided on was that stuff that pulls in from the walls also pulls in the buffer space. Things that push out the walls, like the O's, only push out on the actual chunk. They leave the buffer space alone, with the exception of, you know, when they're next to walls or whatever, because if you have, like, say, this is a wall in the middle of the room, so you have F's out here, and these would and the actual wall itself would be W's. You could actually make this a pair of O's, which would just, instead of making this, because it's 2 chunks with a buffer in the middle, which would make it 7. These 2 O's would just shrink in the sides and make it instead 5 blocks wide while still only being 3 blocks tall. And by blocks I mean world units. The terminology is world units for the individual. Okay, a chunk is a 3x3 set of world units. And the buffer space is
a world unit is just a 1 block.
It's a tile.
Right, it's a tile. Okay.
Yeah.
And sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. Like, I need to make sure that the terminology I say is consistent. So, yeah.
So it goes world unit, chunk, buffer space, wall.
Walls are just walls are defined separately, but yeah.
Okay.
Like the default way we had it set before was that Fs would always include the buffer space around them. So if you had like, you know, an F in the middle of a bunch of Ws, the buffer space in the middle would always belong to the F. And so the chunk would go flush to the wall on the wall side, and the chunk in the middle would have the buffer space around it. This system here, the A's can now, you know, pull in that wall, and, you know, just mess with that system. So, well, for like, whenever we get to the point of dungeon generation, having everything, all the rooms, their basic overall size in chunks makes things really easy, because the way the current system works is that if this is a room, and say you had another room right here, there is exactly 3 world units between them, so that's how the doors work. So you can actually generate rooms to fit within certain dimensions, pluck them down on a bigger grid, and that's how you can generate a dungeon. We haven't gotten that far yet, but whenever we do get to dungeon generation, that's how it's going to be done. Okay.
So here's a question from me. How are you going to generate things within the rooms? Or are you not there yet?
That, like, once all the walls are decided, I think this is actually going to be one of the main topics of discussion between the other developers tomorrow. But essentially, once we have all these walls and rules and room shape things decided, we can just start developing a list of rules that can vary based on zone and any other kind of parameters of, like, you know, if you have a room, if you have like this much space within a room, it'll spawn something there. Or if, you know, a room contains a really narrow passage, it'll like have some kind of gate, you know, almost blocking it off to try and funnel you into something. Or just generally, because we will have exact measurements of the room, and the room can be anything, it'll just be a matter of coming up with a lot of creative rules, so that the content of each room, even though they're completely random each time, is always interesting.
Right. My concern from other builds has been the pits, how they're generated, especially with the last build. I don't know if you've played the last build that was released. Pits just kind of spawned haphazardly and made navigation difficult, so to say.
That will be just something we have to come up with in terms of rules. The thing with rules is, since they're programmatic and just can be applied to every kind of theoretical room, they are very easy to change and fix and whatnot. Like the room system before, they had to create a room and then create all possible permutations of that room for every single room that existed. It was very slow and time consuming. Yeah. So that's one of the big reasons why we're switching to this system. But keeping that in mind, stuff like pits, if some rooms have them poorly placed, trying to go through every single permutation of every single room to find all poorly placed pits.
The alliteration is solid.
Yeah. Trying to find all of those pits to fix all of them on a single case-by-case basis, because you might have thought a certain room permutation was good at the time and ended up being not very fun. That's a very slow process, and especially, like, you know, if they decided to keep their current method of room creation for like all 10 zones, or I think there are 10 zones.
That's not confirmed, Aaron.
I don't know, like, I am working on very, very, like, specific low-level stuff, so I don't actually know the overarching thing. But, like, say they just completed all the zones, and then they decided to they come up with a really great puzzle kind of thing that they wanted to, add into the game. Well, now they have to go back and add some kind of permutation to that for every single room in every single zone, which just won't work. It'll cause too many problems down the line. So having everything being procedural and just being able to just change rules about how things happen will make testing and alleviating a lot of those problems much, much faster.
Right, and that's good to hear. It definitely sounds like a better system for room generation. I remember when, before Christmas last year, I think Nathan was talking about having to build like 700 rooms by himself.
Yeah, I do know that Nathan has told me quite a lot about the extent of his knowledge of room generation. And like, I can't remember, I think at one point he was actually just a little upset over how like what I'm doing now is rendering all the time he spent doing all that kind of irrelevant.
Just tug on his beard.
But yeah,
it sounds cool.
Yeah, it took me a long time to come up with this kind of letter system because, Ryan wanted there to be, more interesting rooms than just these straight corridors that are always, fixed length walls and all this other like very concise organizational stuff. He wanted it to be more interesting, dynamic, have narrower hallways in places and all that other stuff. And trying to like keep the chunk system, because the chunk system is really nice, and at the same time have all these deviations from the actual specific chunks makes things very, very complicated. But when we finally came up with this kind of letter system where you can just, through the kind of databases, we haven't set up databases to work with this yet because I'm still building the system, but when we get to that point, you can just specify, it's like, okay, I want this zone to be very claustrophobic. I want there to be no O's, and oh, the thing disappeared. Come back. Okay, it came back. I want this zone to be very claustrophobic, so I want there to be lots of I's, A's, T's, B's, no O's, so all of the walls are always pulled in a little bit. Or I want this zone to feel very, very open, so F's wherever possible and lots of O's. Or you want this zone to just be very, very rough in appearance, so just grab bag of everything. The zone looks like a mess. Or you could just, one thing I mentioned that was just an idea I tossed out was that, like, say between rooms you want it to feel like you're just going through cracks in the rock, like you're not really supposed to be here. You can make it so that the rooms between rooms that are just hallways consist only of T's, or T's or B's, so that you only have, like, the hallways you're going through are only 1 or 2 units wide at any point. And, it's very claustrophobic moving through all these cracks.
So the hallway is literally just the size of the Delver.
Yeah. Or twice the size of the Delver, because it'll look too stiff if it's always just one. It's like, this is a really convenient crack in the wall.
Right, yeah.
So varying between 1 and 2, and the interesting thing is that because B's pull randomly more on one side than the other, if you have just a plain hallway of B's, like, you can possibly, get this kind of room. Get that kind of hall.
Wait 30 seconds, but I imagine more like a zigzaggy kind of hallway.
Yeah, a zigzaggy, but, maybe it'll have, it'll linger more on one side than the other, and then because you can just change numbers in a database and magically change, how often B's versus T's appear. You can make the hallway tighter or looser, or just change the generation very, very easily.
Right, so you've basically changed the level generation from, I guess, of the, I used static and dynamic already in this stream, so a very static hand-built kind of methodology to one that basically it's 100% dynamic, it's 100% emergent.
Yeah. So whereas before all these things were very carefully, hand designed, put together like that. Now it's while we can still have hand designed rooms because they haven't changed any of that code. I've only been adding.
Mm-hmm.
You can now have very concise. Sorry, I'm distracted because someone is calling me, and I'm not going to answer them.
No problem. I have a question for you again.
What's up?
Is the room chunk system combined with things like enemy placement, or is that on chunk?
Since the resultant room that's generated and the wall placement and all that is based on individual world units, like the way the system works is that it generates chunks, and then from the chunks and the letters assigned to those chunks creates world unit placements of the walls. So since everything is a world unit level, and because we want, like, the game is a grid, it's Legend of Zelda-esque like that, but we don't want to have everything stuck to this meta grid. So it will very much likely be based on world unit than chunk.
Okay. So it's set to the tile, not the chunk generation.
Correct.
Okay. I think I'll type that out to Doom, unless he heard that. I'll see. This Doom's a big modder, so this I'm sure is all things that he is really excited to hear.
Yeah. And once we get to the point of designing those rules, as many of those rules will be modifiable and changeable through the databases.
Right. Which makes sense. And I imagine the databases, the way you guys are going to have it, is that tiles are geared toward the level, I guess the zone, and not the. Let me try to rephrase that.
We're going to have zone-specific rules, of course.
Right, that's that essentially. So like the enemy tile generation is based on where in the drop you're placing it.
Yeah. Well, essentially, what it'll be is that we haven't gotten to dungeons specifically, so it might vary. Like if we decide it's like, okay, we want dungeons to have these types of rooms and these types of rooms. Whenever we get to rules and all that, you can have. If we do something like that, you'll have room-specific rules for general room types, and those will also be dependent on zone. So it's like zone 3 key rooms have these kinds of things in them, and zone 1 just kind of hallway-like rooms have these kinds of rules in them.
Right. So Doom, first of all, says thank you for all the answers. Would you be able to define what a tile is compared to a chunk? I guess you don't call them tiles, you call them units. So what's the difference between a unit and a chunk?
A chunk is 3 by 3 world units. World units are tiles. So
right. So the world unit is what makes up a chunk.
Yes. World units are just the tiles of the world. And then chunks are these 3 by 3 world unit. They're just sets of 3 by 3 world units, just placed in a grid pattern with one world unit of buffer space between and around them.
Right. Okay. So a world unit is like the core of the level, and then the world, or the chunk, is what builds the world, so to speak.
I don't necessarily follow. Like, I'm thinking of it from a programmatic point of view, and the way the level set up is that, like, okay, I want to generate a room. I generate, it's like, okay, I say this room is going to be 20 by 15 chunks. And that's how many chunks are in the room. And then it's like, okay, then I pick a method Right now I've designed 2, but by the time we we'll obviously end up creating a lot more. I pick a method for how I want to change whenever I initialize a room, all of the chunks are set to W. It's all walls. There's no playable space. And then I pick a method for changing those to Fs. So then the game will just analyze the difference, like, okay, here's our Fs, here are Ws. I'll draw the edges to make the walls. And then there's another function that Kobe made long ago that takes those edges and actually turns them into walls, and then you have a level. So what I'm doing right now is just in between that chunk to edge step. So it generates all the Fs. That's going to be the playable space. And then I'm adding another level which changes those Fs to Ts and Bs and Is and some of those Ws to Os to just make the edges more interesting. Then it'll actually calculate the specific edges of this new modified room, and then go back to Kobe's function, which actually places walls on those edges, and then you have a new room.
Right. And then the world units are what fills the room, correct?
Yeah, world units are just tiles.
Right.
They're just the smallest unit of just general measurement in terms of wall placement.
And the tiles are what will determine what is inside the room, correct?
Yeah, just how much space there is in the tiles in the room.
Oh, I meant like enemies and things like that. Though that's tied to the world unit.
Yeah. Like say, okay, this room right here has a handy dandy 5x5 world unit space in it, so we can spawn an angry thing.
Right. Right. Which I think is I guess the difference.
Yeah, and it won't, maybe it'll be 1 world unit from the wall, maybe it'll be flush against the wall, maybe it'll be 3 world units away from the wall. That's something entirely different.
So I guess I'm not a programmer, so I guess I will try to comport this to some kind of physical representation. The chunks are what determine the size of a vessel, and the tiles, or I guess what you call world units, is what fills said vessel. Does that make sense?
I guess you could put it that way.
Like I said, I'm not a programmer. I don't see things, I guess, in like,
like
and all that.
Chunks and world units are just, they're essentially different measurement units is all they are.
Okay.
So you have, that's actually probably the most concise way of explaining it. They're different measurement units. So we originally create a room measured in chunks, and then via properties we apply to those measurements, we change the shape of the walls, and those, because those changes are smaller than chunks, they're based on world units, which is just a smaller unit of measurement. And so the walls, the things we place in the rooms, all those will be based on world units. And those are just tiles, those are just a smaller unit of measurement than chunks.
Okay. So a world unit is like an inch, a chunk is like a yard.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. Hopefully that answered Doom's question. We'll see. Random geometry and random enemies combined result in, well, we've seen it. Yeah, I think I know what he means. With certain games, we won't mention those games because they're not well designed. But basically, he's saying that the enemy is not tied to the actual room generation; it's tied to some other aspect. I think is what he's saying.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. Much time will be spent just designing and configuring the rule sets for how stuff spawns in rooms, because we don't want to just like, okay, this room has this kind of this big of an empty space in it, so we'll just spawn enough monsters to fill that space and be done with it. That's the level. Have fun. Yep.
Good luck. Enjoy yourself. Knock yourself out. Right.
Yeah, that would be very, very dull. So there's going to be a lot of intricate rule sets that will vary depending on possibly room type, definitely on what zone it's in, because you want later zones to have more difficult traps and enemies and layouts to them.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. That's how video games usually go.
Yeah. And all of that, as much of that as possible, will be tied to databases so that it is as easy for modders to modify as possible.
Right.
And also just it'll be easy as possible for us to actually make it.
Right. All sounds pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like it's coming along. I imagine it'll take a lot of time to sit down and do all the rules, but
Yeah, I'm pretty pleased with the amount of progress I've been able to make, and so everyone else seems to be pretty pleased with it as well. So, like, there's a long way to go in a lot of areas because we're, you know, completely tearing out all the rooms that were made before, with the exception of we still need some handmade rooms. Like, I do not want to begin to figure out how you could procedurally generate the first jail room with all the cages and things within the cages. I don't want to think about that. So there will be handmade rooms, and maybe some more intricate puzzles will be handmade. But in general, we're taking out most of just the general gameplay rooms and making them all procedural, so there can be a whole lot more of them with a lot more variety. But since we are starting from that much more lower level, there's a lot to do. But I'm making a lot of good progress, and I'm pretty happy with it.
it's good. I mean, I would imagine you would not want to randomize a boss level as well.
Oh no. All bosses will still be handmade. Like,
Yeah.
they are too complicated and too cool to just be
Randomized. Have
yeah.
you seen the first boss?
Yeah, I've seen and played against the first boss. Because we were playing it in some kind of debug mode, I had the Super Destroyer so I could kill it in a single hit. But yeah, no, that first boss was just, I loved the feeling that it was the entire room.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of feeling like you're being overwhelmed and you're just a tiny mouse barely scraping through and taking down gigantic tigers on your way through. Like, making the room the boss is very, very good, and I anticipate many more of the bosses will be like that, if not all of them.
Yeah, as far as I know, the plan is to make them all kind of like that. Which is I mean, I've had a chance to fight several versions of the boss. So, it's definitely one of the cooler bosses I've fought in a video game.
Yeah.
It channels the idea of a 2D Zelda really well, but it also kind of feels like a combination of Shadow as well.
Yeah.
With a, you know, it definitely doesn't feel like it feels more grand than a Zelda boss. There's some Dark Souls difficulty, some Shadows of the Colossus bigness, you know, that awe-inspiring thing, and then the whole way you play against it is very Zelda, and it has a pattern, and it's, you know, it's a difficult boss until you learn the pattern.
Anyway, I think unless Baker really wants me to keep on talking, I was gonna hand it back over to him. He is currently on the complete opposite side of the room.
No problem. Thanks for stopping in and explaining that stuff.
Yeah, no problem.
One last question before you hand it off to Baker, though, if I could. Can you theoretically introduce small variations to boss rooms?
We haven't talked about that at all yet, but down the road it could be possible.
Okay.
Like, as much customization and variability as possible is good, but, you know, if you make things too random, then you lose out on good design.
Right.
So we're trying to strike that balance, which is why we're not, like, you know, throwing handmade rooms entirely out the window. But yeah, anyway, I'm gonna hand it back over to Baker.
Alright, thanks, Aaron. Have a good day.
You too.
Okay, I'm back.
Welcome back, Baker.
What was that last question? I guess I heard his answer, but didn't.
Could
catch
you
the question.
theoretically also introduce small variations to boss rooms?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, we probably won't randomize them very much, but there will probably be things with the behavior that we would randomize rather than randomizing the room, unless there's one that has. Let's say if a boss had specific obstacles in the room, we might randomize that layout slightly. Like we might design several alternate versions and randomize between them. So that's I'd probably approach it that way as opposed to like using what he was talking about earlier, kind of the full room generation algorithm.
Right. Yeah, that Doom was asking about all that. It all sounds awesome, though.
Yeah, we're. I mean, I think we're all pretty excited about where things are getting to. It's just like, well, you know, we spent so much work just making these like templates for all these different room shapes, like, you know, and they were all so basic compared to, well, I've got, like, we couldn't have made. Let me delete some stuff so we can see this again. I mean, I guess in theory we could have, but it would have been just like such a pain to make a room shaped like this before. Anything that felt slightly more organic. Whereas like we were making tons and tons of like, well, I guess I'll admit just like kind of boring variants like this. And it was just like so many. Well, I think he was talking about how much time Nathan put into some of that stuff, but just, yeah, like lots of work for basically no reward. And at the time we thought it was necessary because, well, because Aaron wasn't hired yet. It was just Kobe. Kobe was behind on lots of other stuff, so it was like, well, like we're never going to be able to get around to actual dungeon, like completely random generation based on algorithms. But now that we've got Kobe and Aaron, we can pull off a lot more cool stuff like that. So, yeah,
that sounds great. It all seems like it's coming along pretty nicely.
Yeah. Well, did you have any other life and death questions for today?
Yeah, but nothing that I think we're gonna tackle on this stream.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll ask a couple things once the stream is done, but I don't think anything too related to anything that you could talk about on stream.
Okay. Well, that's not mysterious or anything.
Not ominous whatsoever.
Okay, well,
Mike from the Classy Dicks TV wants his money back. Then you haven't even spent any money.
Okay, well, why don't you ask me one, not super like spoilery or anything, but one like mysterious question.
Oh, the questions I was gonna ask was regards to the Kickstarter stuff, backers. You know what I mean?
Oh, backer rewards and things.
No, not reward. Write up.
Oh yeah, working on the next update.
Right. Let me think of one here real quick. Cause I'm sure I can throw one out. Maybe Doom has one. Mike says it's irrelevant that he hasn't spent any money. Oh, well, I mean, we've talked about bosses. So do you want to give an indication of what the second boss might be like?
We were actually, well, probably if you had just kind of been able to hear the conversation that was happening over here while you guys were listening to and talking to Aaron. Vlad, the guy who usually sits next to me and has been doing some concept art stuff for us, well, basically the bosses have been on like a long time hiatus to get some other systems done and everything, but Vlad and Nathan had some pretty cool ideas today for some kind of like interesting things that we could add to the second boss. But the second boss, I guess it would be ice related for sure.
Yes.
Because of the whole second zone being icy, or having icy elements.
Yeah.
And they talked about doing something where like the whole room periodically kind of freezes and thaws. And I thought that was really, like, that wasn't really something that we had talked about doing before. And I thought, says no mic.
No mic.
Is it,
I can.
That is not my microphone, I assume. I just saw the comment. Someone said no mic, and I was thinking they meant someone's microphone wasn't working.
No. Classy Dicks TV's name is Mike.
Oh, I see. Okay. So yeah, like possibly some kind of idea of like the whole room kind of frosting over and then thawing back out.
That'd be cool. Maybe when the room freezes over, you get a slow effect.
Yeah, and then having part of the boss that becomes more vulnerable, like that, kind of comes out at that time, but it's because the floor will probably be icy and all of that, it's harder to attack it.
Right, less grip. So it plays with the physics element. Awesome. Yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, I mean that's the only spoilery thing that I can think of, running off of like 2.5 hours of sleep.
And well, not quite 2.5 hour, but just about 2 hour stream. So
yeah. Mike says that he's super pumped to play a new build of the game, and I echo that statement.
Thank you, everyone. We are excited to get it out at some point too. I know we're still far behind, but we're getting there. The next thing I think Aaron may have mentioned, but tomorrow we're going to have kind of a Saturday work day and talk about in-room generation. So basically, we're going to take the stuff that Aaron is almost done with for generating room shapes and walls and apply that to Endless Drop, and then start generating stuff inside the rooms. And then after that, kind of come back around to full dungeon map generation.
Awesome. Because
then at that point, basically we could keep going one way or the other. We could either work on inside room stuff, like traps and smaller stone walls, or we could work on full dungeon map generation. And I said, well, hey, if we give everyone a build, they're going to want to play Endless Drop, and that's like an easy kind of thing to hit without adding lots of extra complications. So, let's switch, and once the wall push and pull and everything that he's working on is done, switch gears, work on objects inside the room, try to get that really interesting, and just implement the whole thing into Endless Drop and run with it. Because then,
right.
I mean, basically at that point, we have Endless Drop with full randomized infinite variety. Like, you're never going to see the same room twice, pretty much.
Yeah.
Which we wanted to be the case, but we could never pull it off with the hand designed rooms we were making. Like, they would always be at least somewhat recognizable.
Right. I guess one last question that I just came up with. How long are we going to have to wait to see the Musketeer?
Well, the elements list was the one I was working on next. I think we worked on that a few streams ago, probably many moons ago at this point. But then the Musketeer would be the next on the list after that. But I need to get back to the elements list. I keep juggling way too many things. So yeah, I probably need to get back to working on characters and try to push them forward again pretty soon. But I really, at this point, it's like adding a new character is just kind of, it's not really fun for me anymore, because even though they'd have slightly different physics, there are only so many ways that you can change a character's physics and still make them fun to play. Because at a certain point you start making them annoying for people. They're either really slow or really slippery, or you've got to, for every way that you make them fun to play, you've got to add something that's makes them unique in a not fun way. Is what it starts feeling like. So I think actually I want to keep the uniqueness that we have, but some of these other characters that we're going to add are probably going to feel similar to, the Elementalist will probably feel kind of like the Gladiator a little bit. The Musketeer will probably feel a little bit like the Rogue, maybe, or somewhere in between. And the Harlequin will probably be a little bit like the Sorcerer, except weird, even weirder.
Yeah.
So, but adding another character doesn't have a lot of benefit unless they actually have abilities to go with it, is what I'm thinking at this point. So that's why characters have been somewhat on hold until we actually get to the special abilities for the classes we already have, or add more weapons for the new classes or something like that, which most of those require more spells and projectile effects, which that system needs another passive work on the programming side too. So it's just one thing keeps holding up another. But
right, it makes sense.
But we could work on the art sometime soon. It'd be fun to dust off the old Musketeer.
I'm just, I like the classes. I want another ranged class, obviously, since
Yeah.
I'm probably the only living human being on the planet that likes the sorcerer.
Well, and we probably we might have to think a little more about projectiles in the game, or like classes that have infinite projectiles, because I think the sorcerer only got away with being broken because everyone except you hates to play him because he's so slippery.
Yeah.
So either giving them less damage or some other. Well, I guess having another.
About, the musketeer, but we'll talk about that next time, maybe.
Okay. Well, we'll probably also have the sorcerer drain his stamina or energy meter will drain the more you use his spirit potions, and so like at a certain point you kind of, unless you wait a little bit, you can't fire, which before was just unlimited. So that could be one limiting factor. But hang on one second. Oh, okay. Yep. See you later, or tomorrow, I guess. Yeah. Aaron's heading out.
No, okay. Bye, Aaron.
So I am now the last man in the office.